Hello, everybody. In today's edition of Ask the Expert, we will talk about a very important topic, well-being for dancers. Now, what exactly that means, we'll dive into in a minute. But before we do, I would like to introduce our guest today, our guest expert. Her name is Elizabeth Sullivan. She has danced with Boston Ballet and Cleveland Ballet, and then she turned to coaching other dancers how to succeed. And so today she'll share with us what she knows. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Thank you for finding the time to join us today and for discussing this very important topic, because so much attention is being paid to exactly how, to the training itself, how you do this or that pirouette, how do you train your body to respond exactly to the demands of the choreography and the professional reality of working in a company. But I think what many dancers in their pursuit of that holy grail of the professional dance career, sometimes it's easy to let go of well-being. And it's almost treated sometimes as a frivolous topic, as a topic that's not as important as the dance training itself. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, and just hopefully understand how important that is for dancers and what they can do in their training today to ensure a long and healthy career and their well-being, not just physically, but also emotionally. It's a huge part of a dancer's journey, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny because you're right. There's so much emphasis on what they're doing with their bodies, and yet we know from studies in sports psychology and performance psychology that it's all a brain game, right? It's a mind game when you're in the studio. How you're going to dance that day, how you're going to go out on stage and perform, how you're going to compete. If your brain isn't in it, if your mind isn't under control and trained, you won't dance your best. And so I like to think of it, when I talk to my dancers about wellness, I'm like, it's not wellness like, I think you should take a bath and feel good about yourself. It's not that. It's like, is your brain, is your mind in the game? Are you preparing your mind for class the way you prepare your body? I mean, no dancer comes into class in the morning and just wanders in and just starts. They all have like a routine, right? They come in 20 minutes early or maybe 45 minutes early, and they have all these things they do and the way they get ready physically. And you have to do that with your brain too, and that's a big aha moment for a lot of my dancers. Like, oh, there's a lot I have to prepare for mentally in order to be in the right state of mind to have a good class or a good performance. So, yeah.
So I think to begin with, it's important to understand, just for everybody watching, that your body is your primary instrument, but just as important in terms of being an instrument in your craft, in your art, is your mind. So your mind is just as much of an instrument as is your body, and you should work almost as much with your mind as you do with the body to have a complete package as a dancer.
Absolutely.
So before we start talking about wellness, let's just kind of define the terms. What is being well for a dancer?
That's a very good question. I include performance preparation, so what they're doing for their whole person, not just their bodies. I include what they're eating, of course, and not just what they're eating, but their ideas about food, how they approach their food and their bodies. I include their definition of success. What is success for them? Is it always getting the gold medal? Is it always getting good compliments from your teacher? How do they define that? Also, I include a lot of mental preparation. It's called mental fitness, tools to kind of get your brain ready for whatever it is you're doing in the studio. I also include injury prevention and kind of management, because injuries are a big part, unfortunately, of a dancer's experience. And if they're not ready for that, or if they're afraid to talk about the fact that they have pain, that can be a problem, lead to problems down the line. So those are some kind of the big topics that I cover, and that I would consider. If you're not paying attention to all of those areas, you could run into obstacles in the future. You could end up with some problems. And they're things that are fun to talk about when they're not going wrong. Right. So I really like for dancers that come to me almost preventively, like they don't come in a crisis, but they come thinking, maybe I'm really not taking care of myself as well as I should have. What do you think about that? And I think, great.
or how do you make sure there is no crisis?
Right,
That's
exactly.
important, because to have a long and healthy career, it's not just enough to take care of your body. And in fact, we will have workshops on how to eat right, how to, recognize and treat and prevent injuries. Today, let's talk about the mind game that you're saying. It's really important what is happening in your mind as you go through everyday training. So if you're preparing for a life in dance, the most important thing is psychological resilience, isn't it? Because there are lots of stressors that every day come into your life, and if you don't have resilient psychological body, physical body, and psychological body, it's hard. So talk about psychological resilience.
It's so, so important. It starts with the way that dancers think about themselves, because most dancers tend to be type A personalities. They're very diligent, they're very self-disciplined, and they're very hypercritical of themselves. So first of all, I teach dancers how to become less critical of themselves, and then how to handle criticism and feedback coming from their peers, their teachers, directors, critics, you name it. So being psychologically resilient just means that you have tools to manage when that information comes to you, whether you're creating it for yourself or someone is giving it to you from the outside, that you don't crumble under that criticism, that you don't fall apart, that you don't say, I guess I shouldn't become a dancer, I guess I'm terrible, I guess my feet stink, or whatever it is that people are saying about you, that you can take in that information, as just information, like, okay, that's good data to have, and then figure out, is it actually true? Is it something I need to pay attention to? Or is it just someone had a bad day and said things that weren't actually true, and I just can discard that? And that's being psychologically resilient, understanding the difference between what's relevant to you and how you can use it, and letting go of the emotional stuff that just might not be very productive for you in the end.
See, that's really important what you just said, because you said that there is criticism. First of all, it's an everyday reality of life. You will be critiqued, and you will hopefully be critiqued, because in all the Russian dancers I know, like they were saying in Russian school that they knew they were in trouble when they stopped getting criticism, because that means the teacher doesn't care anymore to give you the direction. So it's important to distinguish between the two different types of criticism: the destructive criticism, like the tape that's running in your mind, like, oh, I'm terrible, I should stop, or when somebody had a bad day and just lashed out at you, versus constructive criticism. And that's really a gift. That's a tool, isn't it? Absolutely. Like that you can use for growth. In fact, it's a necessary tool.
Absolutely.
Without it, you won't grow.
No. You have to be able to take feedback. You have to, as a dancer, because it's such a big topic, but you have to be able to take feedback, and you have to be able to separate the constructive from the destructive. Absolutely. And
How do you do that? How do you do that?
Practice, like anything else.
How can you tell? Like say I'm a 13-year-old girl who just got yelled at by a teacher for not doing something correctly. How can I turn it from something that hurts my feelings into a gift?
I like to coach dancers to try to separate who they are inside. Like, this is who I am from their dancing bodies.
From what they do. Who you
from
are
what they do.
What they do.
That is hard to do when you're young, because you feel like, but I am a dancer. And that can be true, but you have a body that dances, and then you are who you are inside. And when you can separate those two things, then a person yelling at you about something that you did, you need to be able to say, and this takes practice, but eventually you get to a place where you can say, okay, my body did not cooperate, did not do what I've been trained to do, did not apply that correction, and so my teacher's angry. But she's not angry at me as a person. And when dancers can start to separate emotionally from who they are and with what they do, and I like to call it their dancing body. Your dancing body has bad days. It just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't mean you're a lazy, horrible person and you should get out and never dance again. So it takes time to kind of make that separation, but I've seen dancers do it time and time again. Like they really latch on to that idea, because it feels better to say, I want corrections, but I don't want them to hurt me. Right. They want to use that stuff. They want to use it constructively. So it really helps to sort of start separating those two things. So the
practical tool for dancers out there watching right now is to just even start with that idea that criticism is here to help me, and I need for myself to start learning, practicing. It becomes an everyday practice. It's like a filter. You take what comes in, and then you separate what's useful, what is not.
Exactly.
And also just don't most teachers yell because it's an emotional art form, right? They yell because they believe in you and they want you to be better. So it's
and
not
they
like
get frustrated because they're just humans too.
They are humans too. So this is an important part to try to understand as well. It helps you kind of understand where the person's coming from. So the teacher's yelling because she may be or he may be so believing in me, and they're just frustrated because they're not seeing me rise to the full potential they know I have.
Right.
And so turning that, so talk about so criticism, learn to separate the constructive from destructive, use the constructive for growth. But also we talk about kind of like yelling, the emotional outbursts. How do you deal with such an emotionally charged atmosphere in which you always are?
It's hard. It's really hard. It was hard for me when I was dancing. I mean, I remember, I cried a lot in the beginning, and then I started to do that. I started to separate and try to just hear what was helpful. Now, I'm just going to give you a caveat here. There are some teachers that are giving more destructive comments than they're giving constructive comments. And at that point, you may have to sever your relationship with that teacher. Sometimes it's just not. It can be very scary, and when the feedback is not just negative, but is aimed at who you are as a person, if they're trying to hurt you as a person, and some teachers are for their own, with their own issues, then again, you have to say, okay, that's just not good for me, and I just need to be in a different environment. But most teachers are upset out of their own frustration with you because they want you to do things well. And so you have to be able to sort of have that compassion for them too. And I mean, the way that I have people do, was that your question? What do I have them do? How do you separate yourself from the yelling? How do you separate yourself
from the yelling? And also, how do you tell when, because in most cases, like you said, a teacher may be yelling at you because they really believe in you. And it comes from a loving place that believes in you as an artist. But sometimes, if I heard you correctly, you said that sometimes people have their own emotional traumas, and what they do is not constructive. And in that case, you should speak up, and you should then either let maybe the teacher know that you're hurting my feelings, or maybe talk to parents or adults. What would you recommend? How would you draw that line? How do you tell the difference between constructive or destructive?
I think constructive feedback has to be about your dancing.
Okay.
It shouldn't be about who you are.
But maybe somebody say, well, you're lazy. If a dancer, which they're actors, but we'll have a session on acting as well with Susan Jaffe.
Oh, cool.
Acting and dance, it's a very important topic. But a dancer, say a teacher says, you're lazy, you're no good because you don't do enough. Is that constructive, destructive? How do you tell?
It depends on the relationship with the teacher, right? If you have a long history with this person and you know them very well and they know how to push your buttons that makes you work harder, then your teacher might be doing that, right? Well, when I tell her she's lazy, all of a sudden she kind of wakes up and starts doing what I'm asking for. If it's someone you have no relationship with or a very negative relationship with, then that teacher could be using that to kind of manipulate you into feeling bad so that you work hard, which is... So I like my dancers to be in a very positive, constructive mindset, because that's when their bodies respond best to the information that's coming at them. If they're always kind of traumatized or upset or really frustrated with themselves, they can't get the feedback. The feedback comes at them and they can't even hear it or process it. And I think we've all been in situations where you're upset about something and then you kind of don't hear or see what's happening around you because your body is reacting to that being upset and that kind of trauma.
To the pain that you feel because you think you've been personally attacked.
Yeah. So I try to, have them, as much as possible, separate that out, hear the good stuff. And then if it's not working over a period of time with a teacher, they just can't do that. They feel that they're being attacked personally all the time. It just might not be the best environment for that dancer. Some dancers are really get upset when they're yelled at and they really can't process any information, while the dancer standing next to her responds perfectly fine to that, is able to just filter that out, like you said, and hear the criticism that is helpful for her. So it's really personal, and that's why when I coach dancers, I ask them, some dancers right away will say, I can't work with this teacher, he yells all the time. But someone else will say, I don't care about the yelling, I'm fine with that. So if they're fine with it, we don't work on that, right? Okay, she's already filtering, it works okay for her.
So what you just said is very important, because you talked about a little bit the subjectivity, how subjective this area is, the art form of dance. Because lots of times, dancers say, this is not fair, I deserve this, or I work harder, so I should have been given that opportunity. But really, it's a very subjective art form, isn't it? Absolutely. So maybe preparing yourself for that will also give you psychological resilience.
Absolutely. Well, I always tell dancers, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Every school you audition for is not going to take you. Every competition you dance in, you're not going to get the gold medal. And you have to be okay with that. And ultimately it comes down to, you have to love the process of dancing. You have to want to take class every day. You have to enjoy bar and center. You have to like the process of learning. And that's the love. It can't be, I want to be the gold medalist. I want to be chosen for this role because I think I should be. There's no such thing as I should be chosen or I should be granted this. It doesn't exist in dance because the people making the decisions, they have ideas. There's one company director who thinks that, you know, tall blonde women are the best ballerinas, and another company director who likes short muscular dancers. And that's fine. They're allowed to have those differences. They're allowed to have their own opinion about what kind of dancer they want in their company.
So really, the advice here would be to do away with the idea that the dance world, or life itself, for that matter, should be fair.
No way, it's not.
It's a subjective art form, and you just,
Absolutely.
rather than trying to make everybody be fair, you just look for your environment and stay there.
Absolutely. And it's not about, dancers will say, but I work so much harder than her. It's not even about that. It's not like he who works the hardest gets the prize at the end because of the subjectivity. Because for one dancer who can be killing herself, the ultimate result on stage could be better for another dancer who works in a way that's less, it feels like it's less hard than that dancer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it works for them. So it's all about the ultimate result. What do you see on stage? And that's very subjective. There are some critics that, you know, love the way you dance on stage, and other critics say, I don't know, there's not enough of this or the other thing. And as a dancer, you can't crumble under that criticism, and you can't say, it's not fair that he doesn't like me. I mean, even when you say that, you think that's ridiculous. Some people
That is
just,
ridiculous.
you know.
Because in the way that fairness is not an instrument of measure in this art form.
No.
We don't judge art form by fairness.
It's not science.
Yeah.
It's not math. It's not pure this or that, right?
Yeah. So just understanding that will help dancers already, like
I think so,
reframing
yeah.
their thinking. Well, another important topic, which is faced by dancers every day, topic of rejection, you know, and disappointment. Every day you will deal, as a dancer, just going in, you will deal with disappointment. You will not get the roles you want. You will not work with every choreographer you want. You will not always be in the front of the line. You will not be a subject of this or that article. Maybe somebody else will be. So how do you deal with rejection and disappointment?
I think it really, you have to have your own goals that are very specific to you. So I coach my dancers to learn how to create a blueprint, a vision for where they want to be, and all the little benchmarks that are going to help them get themselves there. And that way, even though someone else might be getting something else, or you got rejected from something that you wanted, if you're moving forward all the time and meeting the goals and benchmarks that you've set for yourself, then you have a kind of momentum in your own success, right? Whereas if you're setting your goals have to be things you can control. So you can't set a goal to get into ABT because you don't get to make that decision.
Because other people control that goal.
Other people control that goal. You can make a goal that I am going to be able to take an audition without freaking out, without shaking, without staring at everybody else around me. And when you do the ABT audition and you feel that you've met all of your personal goals, then whether you get in or not is out of your hands. And there's something so freeing about that for my dancers. They'll say to me, like, I had a fantastic audition. I don't even care if I get in. That's only happened a few times. But people will say, it's okay, I did my best. I did my best.
So number one, in terms of, again, practical tools, understanding that disappointment will be a constant part of your life, so just kind of desensitizing yourself a little bit to that. And number two, like you're saying, set goals that don't depend on others. Set a goal, today I will go and dance, maybe, or I'll go to an audition and I'll control myself and I'll deliver the best I can. That you can control.
Absolutely.
And so setting goals you can control, that's how you deal
Yeah.
with disappointment. Well, in terms of psychological resilience, again, what other tools do you give? And when you say your dancers, you mean dancers that you coach and that you work with as a wellness mentor. So what other practical tools, other than those we've discussed, do you give your dancers?
I'm very big on examining self-talk. So we all talk to ourselves, or we have thoughts. And I have my dancers really start becoming aware of how they talk to themselves, what kind of language they use, and then reframing some of that language into, you know, something more constructive and productive for them. So that's a big part, just tuning in, recognizing if you're negative, and usually we all are negative about ourselves, learning how to reframe that so that you can be excited about what it is that you're doing every time you look in the mirror or go across the floor, rather than talking down to yourself before you even get started. So self-talk is a big one. Learning how to calm your mental noise. A lot of people, especially during slow combinations, they start thinking about other things. They sort of space out, or they're looking and making comparisons with other dancers. So learning how to take some deep breaths and really bring your focus. It's almost like putting blinders on, where you bring your focus in to your own mind and your own body, because that's where you need to be in order to do your best dancing. You can't have your focus outside of yourself. It has to be in. So learning some breathing exercises. Visualization is very important when dancers are learning new choreography or new steps. It's important to be able to see yourself doing something before you can actually accomplish it, and that also builds a sense of confidence that you can do it. A lot of dancers say, there's no way I can do that double tour. Well, if you've never imagined yourself doing it, then it's easy to see how you might not be able to do it. So I have them visualize their own successes, even little successes, like with steps and things. What did I say? I said self-talk, visualization, breathing, comparisons, learning how to be in the studio and not compare your success in the studio or with casting to what other people are getting or doing. That's a bit tied into that fairness idea. Really just removing yourself, which is hard because you're in a community of dancers and you are a class community, but at the same time you have to be very focused mentally on yourself so that you can get the most out of your dancing. So those are a couple of tips.
Those are very helpful tips. Now, we're going to ask you to do something unusual. We're going to ask you to give a tip to yourself, to your teenage self. And so this camera right here, this one over there, that right there is Elizabeth as a teenager. So if you could look at yourself as a teenager, hi, teenage Elizabeth, and if you could tell her something that you know now that you wish she knew, what would you tell her?
Hello, teenage self. You did all right. You did a lot of good things. You stayed with some good perspective and made some good choices. I would say, overall, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to think outside the box a little bit. Do those breathing exercises that your mother told you about from yoga, because they really will come in handy, and years after you're done retiring, all dancers will be doing yoga because it's so good for their breathing. So instead of saying not to do that because your mom doesn't know anything about ballet, you should try some of those exercises. Don't be afraid to know more about your body. Be educated about what your body needs in terms of nutrition. Understand that there are modalities outside of ballet that are good for you, even though most dancers aren't doing them. Don't be afraid to try things that might sound a little wacky at first, but might end up being really helpful for you personally. And also try other forms of dance. When you were 13, you really thought ballet was the top of the pyramid, and there is no pyramid in dance, and so you should be trying all kinds of dance because it will help you be a better dancer. And definitely keep your sense of humor, because it's a serious profession, but it's also not heart surgery, and people say that to you all the time, but it really is true. It's a joy and it's a gift to be able to do what you do, and so hold on to it like that and be lighthearted about it, because if it's not enjoyable and you don't love it every day, then you shouldn't do it anymore. So I would hold on to those things.
Our guest today was Elizabeth Sullivan. She is a success coach and a wellness mentor for dancers, and I'm Sergey Gordeev. We'll see you next time on Ask the Expert.